Welcome to Growth with Portia, a weekly conversation for your personal and professional growth. Here is your host, Portia Booker.
Hey listeners, welcome to Growth with Portia. I'm your host, Portia Booker, and yes, this is my real name. So, question for you, did you bring your curious mind today? If so, I don't want to keep you waiting. Let's dive in. This conversation is number 2 of the part 3 series of honoring my beloved mother, Sharonne Lopez, who made her transition from Earth on July 7th, 2022. So today I am joined by a returning guest who is on a mission to empower others to have a voice and fulfill their life's purpose. She is the host of Getting to the Root of It podcast, where discussions on mental health and addiction come to a common ground. So welcome back to Grow with Portia, personal development coach and mental health therapist, Miss Natashah Khan. How are you doing today, Natashah?
I am good. How are you?
Acting up 24/7, 365, but that's for a whole nother day. Natashah, you know I got to always start off my conversations with gratitude. What are you grateful for today?
So many things. I have to first and foremost say my health. A year ago, I struggled and battled with COVID, and I almost didn't make it. So I'm totally grateful for my health, grateful for my children, grateful for my relationship with God, grateful for this opportunity to be on your show, and the list goes on.
Ooh, health is definitely one that I can also relate in that boat, Natashah, because I remember at one point, especially around this time of year, when I embarked on my television career, my mental well-being was so unstable. It's like I was trying to walk across a tightrope over Niagara Falls. I was really skidding a fine line, but I'm grateful today that mentally I'm on a more stable plane. And the fact that I'm able to recognize when I'm starting to go down a dark rabbit hole, like in Alice in Wonderland, but that's for a whole nother day.
Listen, I've been there too, my friend. So I totally get it. And it's just amazing of where we once were, whether it was just a year ago for me, going down that rabbit hole was probably about 13 years ago. And there aren't words sometimes to describe where we are in the moment and what we're going through, and never even believing or having any hope in that we could even come out of it. But we are both living testimony that we can overcome, and we can get out of that rabbit hole and not get stuck down in the deepness of darkness.
Yes. And within that darkness, there's always that little light that it might be so tiny that it may not appear that a spark is even available. But that's the one thing I can say through my journey. There was always that little flame that kept going no matter what. It would never go out. No matter how much water you put on it or an ice cube, whatever, even if you put it in the depths of Antarctica, it would not go out. It kept going. But that's for a whole nother day. Natashah, I had an opportunity to listen to an episode of your podcast where you talked about cognitive distortions. So for our listeners, Natashah, who are tuning in, for starters, can you please share with us what are cognitive distortions?
So cognitive distortion is a belief or set of beliefs that we develop. I like to call them conclusions that we draw as a result of our life experiences. So for instance, they can be I am statements. A lot of our cognitive distortions are surrounded by when experiencing something that it's always happening to us, to the individual. One of the things that I believe I talked about on my podcast, it was so long ago, but some of the other cognitive distortions are jumping to conclusions, always making assumptions, that rigid thinking, that all or nothing, black or white thinking, where we go from one extreme to the next. There's so many others. I think I had gone over, I think there was like 10 different cognitive distortions that we developed. There's many more, but there's some pretty common distortions that we experience as a result of our life experiences.
And so, Natashah, when you talk about this kind of black and white thinking, right? Everything has to have what I call the process effect, right? Where it's kind of a circular thing. It's not just we land in this boat of this stinking thinking per se. We don't just land in it one day. This is something that is gradual over time. And so, Natashah, maybe can you share with us what events or situations in our life kind of cause this type of thought pattern where we might feel as though we're not good enough, or, the black and white thinking? Please elaborate on that.
Can I share first some of the top cognitive distortions first, and then I can go back and answer that? So in the top list of cognitive distortions that we typically experience, like I mentioned, was the all or nothing thinking. There's overgeneralization, discounting the positives, having a mental filter where we find ourselves focusing more on the negative stuff and ignoring the positive things that happens in our lives, jumping to conclusions, as I mentioned, having the tendency to magnify things and or minimize things means we may either blow things out of proportion, or we may shrink things down and kind of remove the importance or the value of something. We have emotional reasoning, where we tend to rationalize how we're feeling about something. We have should statements, labeling ourselves through our, due to our shortcomings, telling ourselves that we're not good enough, or that we're stupid, or we're losers, etc. And then we have the personalization and blame, where we blame ourselves, and we take responsibility, not just for our own stuff, but we take responsibility for the issues of others. And the reason why I wanted to read that first and foremost is those cognitive distortions are not things that we are born with. It's a direct result of life experiences that we've had. So for instance, in growing up in my own childhood, things that I've experienced. So, and again, in every show that I do, I want to always highlight that I'm not here to place blame on when I speak of my parents, or I focus a lot on sort of the upbringing by my mother. This is not to blame her, and this is not to cause any harm. But from my perspective and the way that I experience things, my mother had a tendency a lot of times, if we made a mistake or we didn't do things in the way that she wanted it done, she had a tendency to say that we were stupid. And so the labeling started there. Now, as a child, I'm understanding today she was upset. She was in her emotions. Maybe she was angry. Sometimes we say the things we don't mean. So I look back today and understand she didn't mean that. But growing up as a child, I didn't know that. So I took that to heart. I personalized those types of statements. And that carried through in my own life, where I began to believe that I was a failure and that I wasn't good enough. And that every time I remember being little, and every time I would make a mistake, I would tell myself, you're stupid. You're just stupid. And then from saying that I'm stupid went to, you're not good enough. You'll never get it right. You'll always be wrong. So now here comes the overgeneralization, right? I'm taking this one experience or these few moments in my life, and now I'm developing this belief, right? This distortion in my mind that it's always going to be this way. So overgeneralization, as one of the cognitive distortions I mentioned earlier, was very big in my life as a result. So again, it's developed because of what we've experienced. And it doesn't have to be one big noticeable experience, for instance. It can be little things, over time. For instance, I'm going to a parent or a loved one, and I'm wanting to be acknowledged, or I'm wanting to be validated, and then I don't receive that validation. What is the perception as a child do I develop as a result? What's the conclusion that I draw from as a result of not getting that validation, right? And so now this, we talked about magnifying things. As I get older, I begin to believe that I'm not important enough, right? Now that's the belief system. Now the magnification of that is, I try to be center of attention because I want everybody to notice me, right? Or the minimizing of that, and I've gone on both ends of the spectrum. The minimizing of that is, what I have to say is not important enough, right? Or I'm just not important enough. Nothing I have to say is of relevance or value. So I'm just not going to talk. I'm just going to be quiet, and I'm going to be shy. And now I'm developing this style of communication of being passive. So we see, as we go back to early childhood influences in our lives, the conclusions we draw leads to these negative beliefs we have of self. These negative beliefs then develop into these cognitive distortions that then really begin to shape how we see ourselves, how we see, ourselves in the world, how we see other people, etc. And it just can, because if we don't have the education and understanding, this can totally spiral out of control. And we go through this cycle every year, every experience, every time something negative happens, it just magnifies those negative beliefs, and those cognitive distortions continue to grow. And we kind of get stuck in that mental cycle.
Natashah, you're literally speaking to something that I recognized in my life at one point when I was at the crossroad of my television career. So let's go back to 2016 of this month in October. 2016, just started my brand new career job. I could already tell that things weren't going on an uphill cycle. They were starting to plateau down. So I'm at this crossroad of I'm not good enough, even though they wouldn't have hired me, right, if I didn't, no pun intended, fit the bill. Mm-hmm. So I'm already in that boat pattern of I'm not good enough. How am I going to succeed in this arena? It's literally, I got stuck, literally. And one day I literally recognized, like, holy crap, I keep landing in this vicious cycle of this thought pattern. And how do I get out of it? How do I break free from this thinking pattern when potentially it's not all the way my fault that I'm here? Obviously, I did something right, but at the same time, there's a kink in the boat, per se, where I'm unable to see the bigger and broader picture within this situation I'm currently in.
So, you use a really great analogy about being in this, being in a boat. And I don't know if it's human nature, but when we experience bad in our lives, we experience things that are not in alignment with our soul and alignment with our spirit, we can't help but find ourselves focusing on that bad thing that's going to happen. And I believe that part of why we focus on what the bad thing is and I think I'm kind of almost answering my own question here of whether it's innate in us or not. We have expectations a lot of times that we don't realize, right? We have expectations that we're going to go in this direction. We're going to do this thing, and this is how we want it to end up. And it's, again, very self-centered in our thought process of how we are expecting things to be. So the minute that things aren't working out the way that we expected, for instance, that little crack in the boat or that little hole in the boat, we immediately go to this place that all these things are going to happen because ideally it's going to take me away from the things that I wanted, right? It's going to stop me from getting my expectations met, right? So we get focused and fixated on, well, how do I fix this? How do I, and a lot of times many of us get stuck not knowing what to do. But what we fail to realize is that before that hole or crack in the boat happened, right? Or before things went awry, before things went left, life had its good moments. It has its successes. It has its times when it wasn't an onward and upward momentum, right? Things aren't always going down all the time. Some of us may perceive that in our minds, coming from, being raised in exposure to abuse and had endured trauma. Yeah, my mind believed that that's all my life was going to be, right? But I was asked one time to look back on that life, and despite physical abuse, sexual assault, verbal and psychological abuse, I was asked to examine what are some of the good things that happened in my life. And my very first response was nothing. And the individual that, had brought this to my attention said, nothing. You've had nothing positive to happen in your life. And it clicked with me. Well, by the time we had this conversation, I had already graduated with my master's, right? Now, keep in mind, I am the first generation and of anyone in my family to finish college and to also have a master's degree. But I'm not thinking that. To me, that's expected, right? Culturally, they expected us to go to school, get a good education, get your degree. So it's not occurring to me that this is anything special or anything unique. And so when I started reflecting back on it, the one thing that was consistent for me, even in the midst of all of the storm and all of the trials and things that I've gone through in life, I always did very well in school. So I got the opportunity working with this individual to really examine and explore. I've won spelling bees, I've won awards in school. Now, granted, while the other parts of my life might have been rocky, right? Here's this one part of my life that was doing really well. I was always a straight A student, made honor rolls several times. I graduated at the top of my class. I did well in college, graduated cum laude. So there are these positive moments in your life. But for me, because of the cognitive distortions, it was, I had to be those things. I had to do those things so that I would not continue to believe that I wasn't good enough, or continue to believe that I was stupid or that I wasn't smart. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. 100% it does, because you put that expectation. It's kind of like ingrained that we're always supposed to exceed the A bar. But then when we have that one little crack in the boat, that literally sends us through a whole downward spiral to the abyss. But we're going to take a quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. Everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. I'm joined remotely with your personal development coach and mental health therapist, Miss Natashah Khan. And we were just having a great conversation, of course, painting a picture on what cognitive distortions are and how our expectations tend to fall within distorting our thinking. So, Natashah, I got to ask this. Can you paint a picture for our listeners of how cognitive distortions show up in our adult life, where maybe we're not able to recognize that this type of thinking is not, quote unquote, normal or healthy, even though we might think that it is?
So that's hard. I can definitely paint the picture, but hard meaning that when you have had a set of belief systems that have been ingrained in you for so long, especially since an early childhood, and you're being told that this is the way that things should be or need to be or has to be, you grow up in life having these, what I like to call, not just unrealistic expectations, but these expectations live more on our subconscious level than it is in our conscious level. So now we're not even aware that we necessarily are carrying expectations for ourselves and or for other people. And so, for instance, I was using an analogy earlier today with someone working in couples counseling. And so this is what comes to mind. So I'll share this with you guys. When the woman met the man in the very early parts of the relationship, he was struggling financially. She felt that he didn't know where he was going in his career, and she wanted to be able to help him. Now, the idea of helping him resembles what she had learned as a child, where she saw her mother helping her father. So there's a little bit of modeling that's happening here in this situation, where she modeled that when the man falls, or if there's a person in the relationship that's falling, the other person's there to help pick them up. So there's this belief through modeling and watching what we've seen, mom and dads, aunts and uncles, grandma and grandpas, how they live in relationships to each other. Many of us we model what we see. And so now you fast forward, 30, 40 years, and she finds herself still helping and carrying this individual. Now, as a result, she has a lot of harbored resentments to the individual, to her partner, because she now has been carrying him, or quote unquote helping him, for so long. So we talked about the expectations, what happened in those moments when she first met the individual and she was quote unquote helping him. There was this expectation in her mind, and only in her mind, that it would be for a temporary period of time. Because when she was younger and her mother helped her father, mom had only helped dad for a period of time. So she drew this conclusion that when we help people, it's only for a period of time, right? So as a result of what she believed, here comes that expectation. I don't have a problem helping because it'll only be for a period of time. Well, the problem is, and what came to mind in my analogy this morning was imagine carrying someone and the one hand is around your neck and you're kind of helping them along, but you want them to keep moving, you want them to keep going, and they're not going fast enough. So you pick them up and you put them on your back and you give them a piggyback ride, right? You put them up on your shoulders. And so now she's not just helping him, she's quote unquote carrying him, right? And or her, ladies and gentlemen, this conversation goes either way. It's not just her to him, but it's him to her as well. And what happens is she continues to carry him on her back with the expectation that he's going to somehow, somewhere hop off and won't need her help anymore. But she doesn't ask if he's capable of getting down. She doesn't have any kind of conversation or communicates with him. She just continues to operate with this expectation within herself. And now she carries him for 40 years. And now she's resentful and upset with him because he hasn't done anything to help himself. Now, one of the hardest conversations here was helping her understand that she taught the individual how to treat her. We teach people how to treat us. And as a result of helping him and then carrying him and never having a conversation about it and communicating about it or saying, hey, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I need you to get off my back, right? Remember, this is just an analogy. She didn't do any of those things. She just expected, like mom and dad, because mom's help to dad was temporary, she just expected that her help to him would be exactly the same. But the two situations were completely different. The two experiences, what her mother and father was experiencing, is very different than what she was experiencing with her partner. So does that help paint a clearer picture?
You know, Natashah, I can't help but to laugh when you mentioned about we teach people how to treat us. I can be honest, for the longest time, I did not understand what that meant literally until I became an entrepreneur. That's when that whole you teach people how to treat you really was a flashing light, like, hey, radar, it's been downloaded finally. You can finally comprehend. When I tell you that was a wake-up call for me, I was like, wow. All this time I've been literally walking around not understanding and comprehending why I keep falling into that trap.
Some people get defensive. Some people initially get offended when you say that you teach people how to treat you. So I've had clients that have said to me, so you're basically saying it's my fault that they're disrespecting me. And I go, yes, it is. Right? If someone disrespects you, you are allowing someone to disrespect you. And you're not going to get respect by disrespecting them back. Right? This is not an eye for an eye kind of situation. Right? If someone disrespects you, and I'm going to bring in boundaries here if I can, if I don't have any boundaries, someone's going to be able to come in and out of my life and do what they want, when they want, say what they want, when they want, however they want. And I let it happen. Because at what point am I willing to set a boundary to say, you know what? I don't like to be spoken to like that. I no longer choose to be in an environment where someone is putting me down, or where someone is being harmful verbally to me, or someone who can't speak positivity. We have the right and we have the power to speak up for ourselves, right? And if we don't speak up for ourselves and set those boundaries, then we leave the door wide open. It's kind of like you leaving the door. This is another analogy. You leave the door open and someone comes in and robs you, and then you get mad because they robbed you. Well, why did you leave the front door open? Right? I'm not saying that they robbing you was right or wrong. I'm just saying, had you maybe take a little bit more safety precautions, you would have lowered the risk of being robbed. So it's the same thing here. It's like, if I hear all the time, my son or daughter or this one or that one is so rude and they're cussing and they're screaming and they're so disrespectful. I am 45 years old and I dare not walk into my parents' home and utter a cuss word ever, because my father has very strict boundaries. He is very clear on what he wants in his home. Whether you are a child or an adult, you will respect it. And as a result of that boundary, if I want to be there, I don't disrespect that boundary, because the outcome is going to be he's going to escort me to the front door, right? He's going to be like, as much as I love you, this visit is over because you're being disrespectful. So he's taught me how to treat him. My mother, on the other hand, was very much a yeller, and she didn't communicate well. So she yelled for everything. And when I got older and I became an adult, guess what I did with my mom? I yelled at my mom too. She and I would have these yelling and screaming matches. And she's like, I don't understand how you don't treat your father this way, but you treat me this way, because it's what we allow, right? My father does not tolerate any kind of that nonsense. My mother, on the other hand, it was like open game night and open fight night with my mother. That's changed over the years, of course, but that's how it was when I was younger.
It was like WWE SmackDown versus Raw 2.0, like from that's literally what I can just picture in my head, Natasha. Like, no pun.
But it was again, like you said, she taught me how to treat her, unfortunately. What now, was that right? And am I proud of those moments? Absolutely not. That is my mother, and I do need to respect and honor my mother. However, it was open game, because there were times if I'm yelling at her, she would yell right back. So she, by yelling back at me, gave the invitation, we can go at this. Whereas my father would look you sternly in the face and goes, I'm not sure who you're speaking to, but it's not me. And you're like, okay. Right? So that's just an example for me of how we teach people how to treat us. And even though I learned that, it was such a split lesson growing up. There's one part of my life where I found myself not setting boundaries in the early years of my life and engaging into those unhealthy communication patterns and interactions with others. But as I've gotten older, I'm more like my father now. I'm very assertive. I let people know what I will stand for and what I will not stand for. And we're either in it together to win it or we're not. And it works.
And Natasha, I'm glad you brought up about assertiveness, because I think in our society, I hate to say this, but it appears that assertiveness tends to come off as aggression. Setting boundaries tends to come off as being disrespectful in some people's realm. Again, that's kind of that perception. Mm-hmm. And so, Natasha, for our listeners who are tuning in, can you maybe give them some tips on how to set boundaries starting today? Just saying, hey, I don't really like this, but maybe giving them that extra tool in their toolbox to take a step away from this current lifestyle that they're in.
Sure. Well, we've got to go back for a second and let's look at communication. And I think it's important. You raised a very good point, Portia, about many perceive when someone speaks up for themselves or stands up for themselves or set a boundary that they're being aggressive. My mother had a saying that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think it's in the how that things can be perceived as someone's being aggressive. But when we're being assertive, we're learning to speak from an I place. We're looking to speak from what we are experiencing, what we are seeing, what we are feeling, what we are thinking. And body language, eye contact, tone of voice. Now, we also have to keep in mind for every culture, this is a little bit different, right? I know growing up in my culture, you staring into your parents' eyes is not respectful. They think you're looking for a fight, right? And there are some people that want you to look them in the eyes and things like that. So you kind of may have to mend to some of that, whatever the culture is, calling for, to ensure that we're being respectful to the to the individuals that we're talking to as well. So in order to set boundaries, we have to first work on our communication. And so it's learning that being passive aggressive, and or manipulative are not effective ways of communication, and they will not help us be effective in setting boundaries. Setting a boundary has two parts to it. The first part is stating what it is that you need, but the other part of it is also executing on an outcome. And I hate to use the word consequences because for us, we are adults and we're not looking to punish anyone, but there needs to be an outcome. Meaning that if I say to you, Portia, I don't like the way that you speak to me. I don't like that tone of voice. And I would really prefer that if we're going to have a conversation, that it not be so aggressive, right? That's me setting a boundary. I'm telling you what I need. In addition, I should have probably thrown in there that when I hear you speak that way, it makes me, I feel, right? I think it's very important for people to understand no one can make you feel any particular way. If people say, well, he made me mad and she made me cry, and someone said something or did something that triggered an emotion within you. And it is your personal responsibility to learn on how to recognize what you're feeling. And you always hear me say, feel your feeling, and then learn on how to manage that emotion, right? So in this conversation, as I'm setting this boundary with you, is letting you know, this is what I observe when we're talking. This is what I need from you when we're talking. This is what I've experienced. This is what I feel. And after I'm done with that, I let you know, this is the outcome part of it, that if our conversations continue in an aggressive manner, then unfortunately, we're not going to be able to have conversations anymore because I'm not able to handle them, right? Or I'm not willing to tolerate them. What we've done in that example is be able to speak from an I place, monitoring our tone of voice, monitoring, our eye contact, body language, et cetera. We're not talking with our hands and our voice is elevated, et cetera. Being able to express to the person what we're seeing, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing, what we need from the other party. And if that need isn't met, this is what you can expect from me. When you keep it from an I place, what we're doing is we're taking away this, the potential and risk of it turning into a conflict because the other party may perceive us as being aggressive, being rude, being hurtful, being harmful. And any human being, if they're in a conversation and they believe that they're being attacked, quote unquote, then they want to now defend themselves. That's instinctual of us. If I believe I'm being attacked by you, I'm going to automatically go up on the defense rather than taking the step back to realize what's really happening in the situation. Is that helpful?
Oh, that's 100% helpful.
Okay.
Because I think, again, it boils down to communication, and you said it, education plus application. Mm-hmm. We have to apply some type of resolution. Hey, can you not talk to me in that tone? It makes me feel uncomfortable. Can you maybe address me by this instead of that? So
Correct.
Really setting the tone, no pun intended. So we're going to take another quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. Everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. I'm joined remotely with, of course, our personal development coach and mental health therapist, Miss Natashah Khan, and we were just continuing our conversation around cognitive distortions, boundaries, and communication. And Natashah, if one of our listeners was interested in connecting with you and learning more about you, is there a website, social media handle, or email you would like for people to connect with you?
Yes, you can definitely reach out to me via email at empoweredvoices45@gmail.com. Again, that's empoweredvoices45@gmail. You can find us on Instagram at Collaborative Healing Partners, or you can check out our website at www.collaborativehealingpartners.com. I know that's a mouthful, but it's it's who we are. So you can definitely check us out at any one of those three platforms. And or you willing to hear more about this conversation that we're having today, you can check out my podcast, Getting to the Root of It. That's found on YouTube, Spreaker, and Google Podcasts, I believe.
Yes, you can definitely get your dosage of education from anywhere that you type or search for things. That's for a whole nother day. Natashah, I got to touch on this. As I'm still navigating this, grief journey, it kind of sprung up a question for me. How does cognitive distortions play a role in our ability to process grief in a healthy way? I mean, because by the way that I'm hearing this conversation, and when I even listen to your podcast, I'm like, wow, I wonder if that's why so many people become stuck and a prisoner of grief, and they're not able to move forward in a healthy way. Can you elaborate on that, Natashah?
Absolutely. You asked so many amazing questions, and I'm sure your listeners are like, Portia, you're asking great questions, and we need more time for this. Let's start with loss. So we experience loss way before we ever really truly lose the physicality of someone that we love, most oftentimes, right? So we have to think about what comes with loss. And again, the belief, what we believe to be true about loss. Because I think that's huge. And everybody sees loss very differently. So based on what you believe loss to be will play a part in how it impacts you when you experience loss and how you're going to deal with it. If you have, we are born to be connected and emotionally connected. And this is for another day and another show about addiction. Addiction is about emotional disconnection. So when we are emotionally deprived, or if we're emotionally neglected, because most often, when we come into this world, we are to experience the balance of love and affection, guidance, nurturance, protection, and safety from both the mother and the father, right? That's the balance when you think of that scale, right? But a lot of us come into this world and we already experience loss by not having one of those parents there, that primary caregiver in the picture. And so oftentimes, if we are fortunate enough to have at least one of our parents, as I know some listeners out there may not have had their parents at all, but for those of us that at least had that one parent, we find ourselves, the scale gets tipped, and we find ourselves gravitating and being very attached to that one individual. Okay. And attachment is another conversation that's very important to have, because we can definitely be attached to things in a way that's very detrimental and unhealthy for us. A lot of times, that's where codependency, which is a form of addiction, actually starts to develop. Now, codependency is an addiction. The attitudes and behaviors are just the same as it would be for someone that's dependent upon drugs and alcohol. Instead, we're dependent upon a person as a means to feel whole, right? As a means to be validated, as a means to find happiness. And so what happens now is if you have that type of a relationship, this codependent relationship, or this attached relationship to this person, or overly attached, when you lose them, it's almost like you've lost a part of yourself, because once when they were alive, you were almost operating as one unit, right? You often see it a lot of times if you've ever seen elderly couples who've been married for so long, and when one passes, shortly thereafter, the other one passes, because they've been so intertwined and so connected to each other for such a long time. So when one loses, one's gone. The other one experiences significant loss, almost to the degree of almost feeling empty on the inside, right? This is where it's so important for us to understand the severity of when we depend on something. If we depend on it more than we truly need to, it can be very problematic. And most people do not recognize that until they experience a breakup, a divorce, and or death, right? Till the other party is not in their lives for whatever the reason, then we realize how severe the dependency is. So between the overly attached issues, believing that we can't be whole without the person, or believing that once something is lost, it's gone forever. All these things coupled together makes it very difficult most oftentimes for us to get through the grieving process. A lot of people will say, well, I love so-and-so and they were my life and they were everything. Well, that's a belief system. And if I believe that they were my life and I believe that they were my everything, and now that they're gone, then what's the opposite of everything? Remember the overgeneralization, or the all or nothing thinking, right? Right? The either black or white. So if they were my everything and they're gone, what's on the opposite side of that spectrum? Nothing. I'm nothing. So now I go from saying I'm everything with this person, and now I'm nothing because this person is gone. That belief system now gets stuck within us, and we are allowing that belief system to resonate with us. Again, ignoring the positives, ignoring the reality that even when that person was alive, you were still somebody without them. But we were so focused and fixated that they made our lives whole that we lost sight that we can make our lives whole too, and we were still whole. They were just an add-on. They were additional to our lives. They're not just a half of us. It's a whole us and it's a whole them, and together we were together. So again, it comes back to what you believe to be true, and how what you believe really shapes your mindset. It really shapes the way that you think, how you, again, see yourself, how you see other people, how you cope or don't cope. If you lack healthy coping skills as well, we talked about communication earlier, but we also have to learn, like, if I was depending upon my loved one to make me happy, which that's a whole other day in conversation, that should not be a direction any one of us should be going into. But when that person is gone, I need to be able to find something else that makes me happy. And the reality is, somebody said to me not long ago, happy is an illusion, right? Happiness is what you make it to be. Someone could be happy in a cardboard box, right? Somebody can be very happy with a simple life. There are many people in the world living life that way, and they are genuinely happy. So when people say to me that they're looking for happiness, I'm like, well, how do you define that to be? Because from my perspective, based on the life that you're living, you might be happy, but you may not see it that way because you're maybe, again, here comes that expectation. Maybe you're expecting more for your life in order for you to find whatever happiness means for you.
Ooh, Natashah, I feel like I literally just sat through a literal college course of how to really take my life, take a whole inventory of the way that I see and view, interact, expect, and learn how to work through some of these, what I call stinking thinking shackles. Because when I think about, and I might get a little emotional again, when I think about this grief journey that I'm on, I was one of those people that was like, man, my mom was my cheerleader. Like, who else is going to continue to cheer me on throughout my life and on my adventures, my endeavors? Who's going to be the person I call to say, hey, did you see this? This happened. So that expectation has now become a complete null and void thing now that my mom has transitioned. And so, Natashah, for our listeners who are tuning in, what can they do starting today if they recognize that their loved one, maybe it's obviously a job, because let's be honest, I went through that when I was transitioning from my television career, that grief, that expectation that I was going to be this, big TV producer, traveling the world, doing all this stuff. But then again, because the expectation was greater than what the reality was, that's where the grief literally nailed me to my own cross. So, Natashah, for our listeners who are tuning in, what can our listeners do starting today if they recognize that?
Well, if I can use what you just shared as an example, you were talking about your mom was your cheerleader, and now that mom's gone, who's going to be your cheerleader? And Portia, I would ask you, as we would bring this to the attention of the listeners, have you not had other cheerleaders since mom has passed? Right? Have you taken the time to look around to see how the God of your understanding has placed other cheerleaders? Now, granted, your mom is the captain of all cheerleaders, right? So no one can definitely replace mom, but there are other cheerleaders on the team. So for instance, you go to a football game. Is everybody going to the game to just see the captain perform, even though she's the best? Or are they also going there to see, every other family is there to see the other members of the cheerleading squad, right? So God's provide you with a squad, even though the captain is not leading the squad. And me personally, because of the believer I am, I believe that your mother's leading the squad. She's just leading the squad in the afterlife, right? So there's no doubt that she still makes her daily presence in your life. And so my message to the listeners is, think of the positives. Look at the positives in your life, even though this individual that you've lost, whether it's through breakup, divorce, and or through death. What are the positives can you bring from that experience? What are the positive memories of that loved one? What are the positive things that you've still been able to overcome, even though you thought you couldn't do it without your loved one? I mean, Portia, your mom is gone, but you are now stepped into the world of entrepreneurship, which we all know is not an easy step to take, but you took the step and you are very successful and you're continuing to grow, continuing to climb. You have your squad of cheerleaders, right? And we are all there in your corner, and always will be. So when you look at the positives in your life, despite the fact that your mom is gone, now, I always have to say, I empower everyone to feel your feelings. You're going to have your days. You're going to be sad. You're going to have your days where, darn it, the girls on the squad just isn't as great as the captain of the cheerleading team. And that's okay, right? And you can own that, admit that, and you can be sad about that. But when we want to step outside of that moment of loss and ask yourself, really, have I lost? You speak a lot of how, at least in a perspective, that loss is an opportunity for cleansing, right? So when we lose, again, here's belief. Do I believe that loss means I've lost it all and life is over and I can't move on? Or does loss mean it's an opportunity to gain and it's an opportunity for cleansing? Because I don't know about you, but just hearing this opportunity to gain and this opportunity for cleansing is more hopeful and exciting to me to look ahead than being stuck in the mindset that everything's lost, everything's gone, life is over. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%.
So perspective for me is huge. The power of the mind, is the most powerful tool that we have in order to truly live a healthy life. When you asked me earlier about being grateful for health, when I think of my mental health, it has everything to do, not just with my relationship with a higher power, but change in mindset. I am no longer that girl who thinks black and white. I'm no longer overgeneralizing things. I'm no longer needing to be center of attention.
Yes, and you also have your cheerleaders too. The captain might take a seat every once in a while, but you still have those cheerleaders who are keeping you on the playing field.
Amen.
So we're going to take another quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. Everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. Well, Natashah, I thank you so much again for coming on and sharing with our listeners so much food for thought and words of wisdom. I truly am grateful for you to come on and really help us to be better and, no pun intended, remove that veil of stinking thinking. So, Natashah, for our listeners who are tuning in, I mean, how can individuals begin to untwist or break free from this thought pattern that comes from cognitive distortions?
Great question. So again, let's just do a recap. Understanding that the cognitive distortions they evolve or develop as a result of past experiences in our lives, where we draw conclusions and we gain our own perspective as a result of not really understanding and having processed our experiences. Those set of beliefs, such as I am a failure, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not capable, etc., promotes a series of emotions of guilt and shame and disappointment, rejection, fear, shame, etc. And our lack of healthy coping skills and not having healthy strategies to manage how we feel drives into unhealthy behaviors. So this cycle that develops over time, that evolves into this distorted thinking pattern, we can begin to break that up by I shouldn't say simply, but being able to look at our experiences of the past for what they are and truly understanding those experiences and developing a more healthy and positive perspective of the experience. So rather seeing it as from a negative point of view, look at what you may have gained. What are the positives? What did you learn as a result of those experiences? Like I mentioned earlier, as a result of everything that I had been through in my life with different traumas and different forms of abuse, I no longer see myself as this wounded victim who has been victimized all of her life. I am truly an overcomer, and I've learned a lot about how to deal with powerlessness. I've learned on how to cope in moments of feeling helpless and or hopeless. I am human and I do experience these emotions, but I no longer allow the emotions to consume me in such a way that I'm not able to function, in a healthy way, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually in my life. So reprocessing and really understanding your past experiences is the first step. The second is what we talked about earlier, is looking at the positives in your life. Despite all of the ugliness, despite of all the quote unquote bad parts of our lives, what are the good parts? What do they look like? What did it take for you to achieve those good things in life? Right? Are you a hard worker? Are you dedicated? Are you capable of doing things? Not everything, but just capable of doing things. So many of us are really good at a lot of different things. Many people are very creative artistically, but tend to minimize that because they don't have the academic, they're not, scholastically inclined, if I'm using that terminology correctly. Some people are more focused and really good in, what we call bookworms, right? They're really good with the books, but they're not really good with doing, manual labor, right? So everybody has their own specialties, their own gifts and their skills. So I think it's important to start looking at, what your skill sets are and what the positive things are that you cultivated, and turn those I am not statements into I am statements. So instead of saying I am not capable, I am capable. Instead of saying I'm not lovable, I am lovable. Because more importantly, you love you, and the God of your understanding loves you. So if anybody else in the world is not a fan of you, that's their problem, not yours. Right? So changing those negative self-talk statements into positive self-talk statements is another step in the process. Recognizing how you're feeling your feelings, and learning on how to release those unwanted emotions. I don't like to say we have positive and negative emotions. I don't think we're like charged like a battery. I think that we are human and we have emotions, but we've got to realize that there's some emotions that we don't want. I don't want to be buried in guilt and shame and rejection and disappointments. So am I going to experience it? Absolutely. But do I have to hold on to it? No, I don't. Right? So I've got to learn how to feel that feeling and release that emotion, so it's something that I no longer hold on to. And as a result of that, our behaviors will change. We will learn to stop living a life in survival mode, and we will truly begin to live life the way that we're designed to live and truly get that happiness that I think that we're all seeking for.
And I want to go back again to what you mentioned about happiness being an illusion, right? Happiness is something that is a personal choice. I like to say that it is, because how can you truly say that you're happy if internally, when you say I'm happy, but then your gut instinct is saying otherwise? You have to truly feel happiness internally, and it starts with you. It's not from somebody else. It's not from you buying a whole bunch of materials and junk and wearing the latest Jordans. No, it starts internally. And you said it, Natashah, there's people who are, playing with boxes all day, and they don't have as many luxuries as we do, but they are truly happy and content with the life that they live.
Yeah, I think it's I think we share a fellow friend in common, Dawn, who talks about her mission trips to South Africa, and you have people that are without food and shelter, but they're filled with happiness in their heart. And many people may ask, well, how can they? Their love for a higher power, their love for their support system, the joy comes from within, and it's a perfect example of what you just said. I don't need to have the food, and I don't need to have the shelter. I don't need to have the materialistic things of this life in order to be fulfilled on the inside. And I
100%.
think society has spent too much time trying to teach us that we need things external and outside of ourselves to be whole, versus I believe that how I have found my wholeness is through self-reflection, working on me, working on that mindset, working on feeling my feelings and letting go of the resentments and the hate and all the unwanted emotions that I held on to for so many years that led my life to be so self-destructive. Letting go of all of that opened up my heart, opened up my mind, and created space for me to really embody love so I can truly love others. And it has forever turned my life around. And I can honestly say that I'm truly happy and whole today, and I'm not relying on a person, place, or thing and or substances in order to find that happiness or wholeness.
Yes. Oh, self-reflect. That's for a whole nother episode and conversation, Natashah. We can go on a whole tangent about that. But yes, self-reflection has definitely been my key to standing before you today to be able to host Grew with Portia, despite the grief journey that I've been on since the transition of my mom. Well, everybody, that was your personal development coach and mental health therapist, Miss Natashah Khan, that you heard from. And that concludes another episode of Grew with Portia, everybody. Thanks for listening, and have a good evening.